The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the crooked boards of the shack at the edge of Ruby City, Nevada, and Rebecca Zimmerman stood in the doorway with her shoulders squared against the world that had long since stopped caring whether she lived or died. She was 22 years old, and the townspeople whispered that she was cursed, that her touch brought bad luck, that the fire that had killed her parents 3 years ago had been no accident but divine judgment. None of it was true, but truth mattered little when fear took root in small minds. The shack leaned precariously to one side, its roof patched with scraps of tin that rattled in the wind. The door hung on a single hinge, and the windows were covered with oiled paper instead of glass. Rebecca had been living there since the fire, surviving on odd jobs that no one else wanted, and the occasional charity left on her doorstep by someone too guilty to let her starve but too afraid to be seen helping her. She wore the same faded blue dress every day, mended so many times that the original fabric was barely visible beneath the patches. Her dark hair hung in a braid down her back, and her green eyes held a wariness that made her seem older than her years. She watched the town from her doorway each morning, watched the people hurry past her property with their eyes averted, watched the children being pulled away by their mothers when they wandered too close. She had stopped trying to change their minds long ago. Instead, she focused on surviving one more day, one more week, one more season in this place that had decided she did not belong. The knock on her doorframe startled her so badly that she jumped. No one ever knocked. No one ever came close enough to knock. She turned to find a man standing there, his hat in his hands, his blue eyes kind and uncertain. "Madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that reminded her of distant thunder. "I apologize for disturbing you. My name is Harrison Kane. I just arrived in town yesterday and I am looking for work. I heard you might be in need of some repairs." Rebecca stared at him, too shocked to speak. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, well-worn but clean, and his hands were calloused from years of hard labor. He looked to be about 25 or 26, and there was something about the way he held himself that suggested he was not the kind of man who frightened easily. "Who told you that?" she finally managed to ask, her voice rusty from disuse. She rarely spoke to anyone these days. "The man at the general store," Harrison said. "I asked if anyone in town needed carpentry work, and he mentioned your place could use some attention." Rebecca felt her stomach twist. The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, was one of the worst gossips in Ruby City. He had probably told this stranger all about her, about the curse, about how she was not to be trusted or associated with. She waited for Harrison to make some excuse and leave, but he just stood there looking at her expectantly. "I do not have money to pay you," she said bluntly. There was no point in pretending otherwise. "I did not ask for money," Harrison said. "I have enough saved to get by for a while. I just need something to do with my hands. I have been drifting for too long and I am tired of it. If you will let me fix your place up, that would be payment enough. A man needs purpose." Rebecca wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell him to leave before the town turned on him too, before association with her ruined whatever chance he had of making a life here. But the roof had leaked badly during the last rain, and she had spent the night huddled in the one dry corner of the single room, and she was so very tired of being cold and wet and alone. "Why would you do that?" she asked instead. "Mr. Peterson must have told you about me." Harrison nodded slowly. "He told me that people think you are unlucky. He told me about the fire. He told me that I should stay away." He paused, then met her eyes directly. "He did not tell me anything that made me think you deserve to live in a shack that is about to fall down around your ears." Rebecca felt something crack inside her chest, something she had thought was frozen solid. "The people here will not like it if you help me." "Then I suppose it is a good thing I came here to find work, not friends," Harrison said. He put his hat back on and gestured toward the shack. "May I take a look around? I want to see what needs doing." She stepped aside, and he walked past her into the small space that served as her entire world. She watched him examine the sagging roof beams, test the floorboards with his weight, run his hands along the walls. He said nothing, but she could see his jaw tightening, see the way his hands clenched into fists when he found the worst of the damage. "This whole place should be torn down and rebuilt," he said finally, his voice rough with something that might have been anger. "But that would take more time than I think you can spare. So I will shore up what can be saved and replace what cannot. It will not be fancy, but it will be sound. That is my promise." "I told you, I cannot pay you," Rebecca said, feeling the need to remind him before this went any further. Harrison turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I heard you the first time, Miss Zimmerman. I am not asking for payment. I am asking for the chance to do something that matters. Do I have your permission to start?" Rebecca nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Harrison smiled, a slow, warm expression that transformed his face, and then he was heading out the door, already making plans out loud about what materials he would need and where he could get them. She stood in the middle of her broken-down shack and felt tears prickling at her eyes for the first time in months. She did not know why this stranger was willing to help her, but she found herself desperately hoping he would not change his mind. Harrison returned an hour later with a wagon full of lumber, nails, and tools. Rebecca watched from a distance as he began to work, moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who had built and repaired more things than he could count. He started with the roof, climbing up with a sure-footedness that made her nervous despite herself. "Be careful," she called up to him, then immediately felt foolish. He was clearly capable of taking care of himself, but Harrison just grinned down at her. "I appreciate the concern, Miss Zimmerman. It has been a while since anyone worried about me falling off a roof." He worked through the heat of the day, only stopping when Rebecca brought him water from the well. He thanked her each time, and she found herself lingering a bit longer with each visit, curious about this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had been too afraid to voice. "Where did you come from?" she asked during one of these water breaks. They were sitting in the shade of the only tree on her property, a scraggly cottonwood that provided meager relief from the Nevada sun. "All over," Harrison said, taking a long drink from the ladle. "I grew up on a ranch in Colorado, but my father died when I was 16, and my mother followed him a year later. I have been working cattle drives and ranch jobs ever since, moving from place to place. I have been from Montana to Texas, and just about everywhere in between." "What brought you to Ruby City?" Rebecca asked. It was not exactly a prosperous town, not like Virginia City or Carson City. Most people came here because they had nowhere else to go. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dusty landscape. "I got tired of moving," he said finally. "I am 25 years old, and I do not have anything to show for it except a horse, a saddle, and the clothes on my back. I want to put down roots somewhere, build something that lasts. Ruby City seemed as good a place as any to try." "People here are not very welcoming to outsiders," Rebecca warned him. "Especially outsiders who associate with me." "Then maybe we will have to change their minds," Harrison said, looking at her with that steady blue gaze that made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced in years. "You cannot change people who do not want to be changed," Rebecca said bitterly. "Maybe not," Harrison agreed, "but that does not mean I am going to let their opinions dictate how I live my life." He stood up, brushing dirt from his pants. I should get back to work. I want to get the worst of the roof holes patched before dark. Rebecca watched him climb back up onto the roof, and she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a while to recognize it as hope. Over the next several days, Harrison worked from sunrise to sunset, transforming her shack piece by piece. He replaced the rotten boards in the roof and walls, fixed the door so it hung straight on new hinges, and even installed real glass in one of the windows. He reinforced the floor and built her a proper bed frame to replace the pile of blankets she had been sleeping on. He worked with a quiet intensity that spoke of a man determined to do the job right, no matter how long it took. Rebecca found herself helping where she could, holding boards steady while he nailed them in place, handing him tools, cleaning up the scraps. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side in comfortable silence, broken only by occasional conversation. She learned that he liked his coffee strong and black, that he had a scar on his left hand from a branding iron accident, that he could whistle any tune he had heard once through. He learned that she could identify every plant in the area and knew which ones were good for medicine, that she had taught herself to read from her mother's Bible, that she had once dreamed of being a school teacher. Why did you not pursue it? Harrison asked one afternoon as they sat in the shade, taking a break from the relentless heat. Rebecca looked down at her hands. After the fire, no one would hire me. No one wanted their children taught by someone cursed. And after a while, I stopped believing I could be anything other than what they saw when they looked at me. Harrison was quiet for a moment, then reached over and gently lifted her chin until she was looking at him. I do not see a curse when I look at you, Rebecca. May I call you Rebecca? She nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. I see a woman who has survived things that would have broken most people, Harrison continued. I see someone who gets up every morning and faces a world that has been cruel to her and keeps going anyway. That is not cursed. That is brave. A tear slipped down Rebecca's cheek before she could stop it. Harrison wiped it away with his thumb, his touch gentle and warm, and for a moment they just looked at each other in the dappled shade of the cottonwood tree. Then the sound of voices made them both turn. A group of townspeople had gathered at the edge of Rebecca's property, watching them with hostile eyes. Rebecca recognized most of them, including Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, and her daughter Sarah, who had once been Rebecca's friend before the fire. You there, stranger, Mrs. Patterson called out, her voice sharp. We would like a word with you. Harrison stood up slowly, his hand resting briefly on Rebecca's shoulder in a gesture of reassurance. I will be right back. Rebecca watched him walk toward the crowd, her heart pounding. This was what she had feared, what she had known would happen eventually. The town was coming to drive him away. She could not hear everything that was being said, but she could see the aggressive postures of the townspeople, could see Mrs. Patterson's mouth moving rapidly as she clearly lectured Harrison about the folly of associating with Rebecca. She saw him listening, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. Then she saw him start to speak, and the crowd grew quiet. Harrison's voice carried back to her on the wind, strong and clear. With all due respect, madam, I have heard what you all think about Miss Zimmerman, and I have to say, I do not put much stock in superstition and gossip. She has been nothing but kind to me, and she deserves better than to live in a shack that was ready to collapse. I intend to finish the repairs I started, and then I intend to keep spending time with her, because I enjoy her company. What you all think about that is your business, but I would appreciate it if you would keep your opinions to yourselves from now on. The crowd erupted in angry muttering, but Harrison just tipped his hat to them and turned his back, walking calmly back to where Rebecca stood frozen in shock. "You should not have done that," she said when he reached her. "You should have listened to them. They will make your life miserable now." "Let them try," Harrison said with a shrug. "I have dealt with worse than small-town gossips. Besides, you are worth it." Rebecca felt her eyes filling with tears again. "You do not even know me." "Then give me the chance to," Harrison said softly. "I would like to know you better, Rebecca. A lot better." She looked up at him, at this man who had appeared in her life like a miracle, and she found herself nodding. "I would like that too." The transformation of the shack took 2 full weeks. By the time Harrison finished, it was hardly recognizable as the same structure. The roof no longer leaked, the walls were straight and sturdy, the door closed properly, and the single window let in cheerful sunlight. He had even built her a small table and 2 chairs, a set of shelves for her few belongings, and a proper kitchen area with a new stove he had purchased with his own money, despite her protests. "Consider it a housewarming gift," he had said with that easy smile that made her heart flutter. On the last day of the repairs, Harrison stood back to survey his work, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "It is not much," he said, sounding almost apologetic, "but it is solid. It will keep you dry and warm." "It is wonderful," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. "It is more than I ever hoped for. Thank you, Harrison, for all of it." He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know you can say no if you want to. I will understand, and it will not change anything between us." "What is it?" she asked, her heart suddenly pounding. Harrison took a deep breath, then took off his hat and held it in his hands, the same way he had that first day when he showed up at her door. "I know we have not known each other very long, but these past 2 weeks have been the best I have had in longer than I can remember. I find myself thinking about you all the time, wondering what you are doing, wanting to hear your thoughts on things. You are smart and kind and brave, and I would very much like the chance to court you properly if you will allow it." Rebecca stared at him, unable to quite believe what she was hearing. "You want to court me?" "Very much," Harrison said. "I know it might seem sudden, but I am not a man who wastes time once he knows what he wants, and I want to see where this could go between us. I want to take you to dinners, go on walks with you, learn everything there is to know about you. I want to show you that not everyone in this world thinks you are anything less than amazing." "The town will be furious," Rebecca said, but even as she spoke, she could feel herself wanting to say yes, wanting to take this chance that had been offered to her. "I do not care about the town," Harrison said firmly. "I care about you. Say yes, Rebecca, please." She looked at him, at this good, kind man who had rebuilt her home and was now asking for the chance to rebuild her life, and she felt something inside her that had been frozen for 3 long years finally begin to thaw. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will let you court me." The smile that spread across Harrison's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He reached for her hand, holding it gently in his own, and Rebecca felt the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin, and the steady strength that seemed to radiate from him. "You have made me very happy," he said softly. "You have made me believe in happiness again," Rebecca replied, and she realized it was true. Harrison lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly that it made her smile despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "I promise I will do everything in my power to make you happy for as long as you will let me." "I believe you," Rebecca said, and for the first time in 3 years, she looked toward the future with something other than dread. True to his word, Harrison courted Rebecca with a determined dedication that left her breathless. Despite the disapproval of nearly the entire town, he called on her every day, bringing small gifts, flowers he picked from the surrounding hills, a book he thought she might enjoy. They took long walks in the desert in the early mornings when the heat was bearable, and he listened with genuine interest as she told him about the plants and animals they encountered. She had never had anyone pay such close attention to her words, treating her knowledge as valuable rather than strange. He invited her to have dinner with him at the hotel restaurant, and when the proprietor tried to refuse them service, Harrison calmly pointed out that his money was as good as anyone else's, and if the man would not serve them both, then he would take his business elsewhere. The proprietor, seeing the determination in Harrison's eyes and not wanting to lose a paying customer, reluctantly showed them to a table in the corner. Rebecca had been mortified by the stares and whispers from the other diners, but Harrison kept his attention focused entirely on her, talking and laughing as if they were the only two people in the world. "How can you stand it?" she asked him as they walked home that evening. "The way they look at us, the things they say." Harrison was quiet for a moment, his hand warm where it held hers. They had progressed to holding hands during their third walk together, and Rebecca still marveled at how natural it felt, how right. "I spent a lot of years moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots," he said finally. "And during that time, I saw a lot of injustice. I saw ranch owners treating their workers like dirt. I saw whole families starving while others had more than they could ever use. I saw people being judged for things they could not control, for the color of their skin, or where they came from, or how much money they had. And I realized that if good people stay silent in the face of injustice, then injustice wins. So I decided a long time ago that I would not be silent. I would stand up for what is right, even if it made me unpopular." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "What this town has done to you is wrong, Rebecca. The fire that killed your parents was a tragedy, not a curse. You did nothing to deserve the way they have treated you. And I will be damned if I am going to let their small-minded prejudices stop me from spending time with the most remarkable woman I have ever met." Rebecca felt tears pricking at her eyes again. She seemed to cry so much these days, but they were different tears than before. These were tears of gratitude, of wonder, of slowly healing wounds. "I do not know what I did to deserve you," she whispered. "You survived," Harrison said simply. "You kept going when anyone else would have given up. That is more than enough." He walked her to her door, now properly hung and functioning, and kissed her hand goodnight the way he did every evening. Rebecca went inside to her newly repaired home and lay down on the bed he had built, and she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt cherished. As the weeks passed, Rebecca began to notice small changes in how some of the townspeople treated her. Not everyone, certainly, most still gave her a wide berth and muttered about bad luck. But occasionally, someone would nod to her on the street instead of turning away. The woman who ran the bakery sold her bread without the usual hostility. Mr. Peterson at the general store started to treat her transactions as business rather than personal affronts. She realized that Harrison's unwavering support was forcing people to reconsider their assumptions. If this capable, hard-working cowboy thought Rebecca was worth his time, maybe she was not as cursed as they believed. Or maybe they just did not want to lose Harrison's business and goodwill. Either way, the slight thaw in the town's attitude toward her was noticeable. Harrison found work at one of the local ranches, hired by a man named Mr. Sullivan, who cared more about a worker's skill than town gossip. He spent his days working cattle and mending fences, and his evenings with Rebecca. On Sundays, his one day off, they would pack a lunch and spend the entire day together, exploring the countryside around Ruby City. It was on one of these Sunday excursions that Rebecca finally told him the full story of the fire. They were sitting by a creek bed that ran with water only during the spring snowmelt, but provided a shady refuge even in the dry season. She had been dreading this conversation, afraid that once he knew everything, he might change his mind about her. "The fire started at night," she began, her voice soft. "I was 19, and I had been at a church social. My parents stayed home because my father was not feeling well. When I came back, the house was already engulfed in flames. I tried to get to them, but the smoke and heat drove me back. I screamed for help, but by the time the town organized a bucket brigade, it was too late." She paused, remembering that horrible night, the heat on her face, the sound of the roof collapsing, the knowledge that her parents were inside. "The fire marshal said it was probably a lamp that got knocked over, but people started saying that I must have said it before I left, that I had wanted my parents dead so I could have their property. It was not true, Harrison. I loved my parents. They were good people. My father was a carpenter and my mother took in sewing. We were not wealthy, but we were happy." Harrison reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I never doubted that for a second. But others did," Rebecca continued. "And when I did not have any money to rebuild, when I ended up in that shack, because it was all I could afford, people said it was proof that I had not inherited anything because my parents had written me out of their will, which also was not true. We never had much to begin with, and what little there was went to paying for their funerals and settling their debts. But the rumors kept spreading, getting worse. People said I was cursed, that I brought bad luck to anyone who helped me. Old Mrs. Henderson fell and broke her hip the day after she gave me some bread. Mr. Thompson's cow died the week after he hired me to help with his harvest. It did not matter that Mrs. Henderson was 80 years old and had brittle bones, or that Mr. Thompson's cow had been sick for months. Everything bad that happened in this town somehow became my fault." She looked at Harrison, searching his face for any sign of doubt or discomfort, but found only compassion and anger on her behalf. "By the time a year had passed, I was completely ostracized. No one would hire me. No one would talk to me. If I walked into a store, people would leave. I survived on occasional charity from people who were too guilty to let me starve but too afraid of their neighbors to help me openly. I learned to garden what I could in the poor soil around the shack. I learned which plants were edible. I learned to make a little go a long way, and I learned to be alone." "You are not alone anymore," Harrison said firmly, "and you never will be again, not if I have anything to say about it." Rebecca smiled through her tears. "How did I get so lucky as to have you knock on my door?" "I think I am the lucky one," Harrison said. He reached up and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, Rebecca. What you have endured would have destroyed most people, but you are still here, still kind, still hopeful. That takes a courage I can only aspire to." "I did not feel very courageous before you came along," Rebecca admitted. "I felt like I was just existing, not really living. And now?" Harrison asked softly. "Now I feel like I am waking up from a long sleep," Rebecca said. "Like I am remembering what it feels like to be human again." Harrison leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers, a gesture of intimacy that made her heart race. "I am falling in love with you," he whispered. "I know it is probably too soon to say that, but it is the truth. I think I started falling in love with you the first time I saw you standing in that doorway, trying to be brave even though you were scared. And every day since then, I have fallen a little more." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered back. "I think I have been since you refused to leave even after I warned you away." They stayed like that for a long moment, foreheads touching, hands clasped, breathing in the same air. Then Harrison pulled back slightly and looked into her eyes. "I want to kiss you," he said. "May I?" Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. Harrison cupped her face gently in his hands and leaned in, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was sweet and tender and full of promise. Rebecca felt like her whole body was singing, like every nerve ending had come alive all at once. She kissed him back, pouring into it all the loneliness and longing of the past 3 years, all the hope and joy he had brought back into her life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison was smiling. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why did you wait so long?" Rebecca asked, feeling bold. "I wanted to make sure you were ready," Harrison said. "I wanted you to know that I am serious about this, about us. This is not some passing fancy for me, Rebecca. I am in this for the long term." "So am I," Rebecca said, and she knew it was true. She trusted this man with her heart in a way she had never trusted anyone before. As autumn arrived in Nevada, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain, Rebecca found herself happier than she had been since before her parents died. She and Harrison had fallen into a comfortable routine, spending every possible moment together. He had become a fixture at her small home, often staying for dinner after work, helping her tend the small garden she had planted, reading to her from the newspapers he brought from town. The townspeople had largely stopped their open hostility, though they still kept their distance. Rebecca suspected that Harrison had made it clear through word and deed that anyone who mistreated her would have to answer to him, and most people were not willing to test him. He had a reputation now as a hard worker and a fair man, but also as someone with a stubborn streak, a mile wide who did not back down once he had taken a stand. It was a Saturday evening in October when Harrison arrived at her door looking nervous. He had been to the barber and was wearing his best shirt, and Rebecca felt her heart start to pound even before he spoke. "Rebecca, would you take a walk with me?" he asked. "There is something I want to talk to you about." She nodded and grabbed her shawl, and they walked together toward the edge of town, where the land opened up into desert scrub and distant mountains. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that took her breath away. Harrison led her to a spot overlooking the valley, where someone had placed a large flat rock that made a natural bench. They sat down, and he took both of her hands in his. "I have been thinking a lot about my future lately," he began. "When I came to Ruby City 4 months ago, I was drifting. I did not have a plan beyond finding work and maybe staying in one place for a change. But then I met you, and everything changed." Rebecca waited, barely breathing, as he continued. "You have become the center of my world, Rebecca. Everything I do, every decision I make, I find myself thinking about how it will affect you, how it will affect us. I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. I do not want to imagine it." He slid off the rock and knelt in front of her, and Rebecca felt tears starting to stream down her face before he even spoke again. "I know we have only known each other a few months, and I know some people will say it is too soon, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Rebecca Zimmerman, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you happy? Will you build a future with me?" Rebecca was crying too hard to speak for a moment. She nodded frantically, trying to get the words out. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Harrison, I will marry you. I will absolutely marry you." Harrison stood up and pulled her into his arms, and they held each other tight as the sun set behind them, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. When he finally pulled back, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "It is not fancy," he said apologetically, "but it was my mother's and it is the most precious thing I own. I would be honored if you would wear it." "It is perfect," Rebecca said as he slipped it onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her. She looked at the ring through her tears, at this symbol of the future she had never thought she would have, and she felt like the luckiest woman in the world. I love you, Harrison said, cupping her face in his hands. I love you so much. I love you too, Rebecca replied. More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. He kissed her then, deep and long and full of promise, and Rebecca kissed him back with all the passion she had been holding in check for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the stars had started to come out overhead. "When do you want to get married?" Harrison asked, his arms still around her waist. "As soon as possible," Rebecca said without hesitation. "I have waited long enough for happiness. I do not want to wait any longer than necessary." Harrison laughed, the sound full of joy. "Then we will get married as soon as we can arrange it. Though I have to warn you, it might cause quite a stir in town." "Let them be stirred," Rebecca said recklessly. "I am going to marry the man I love, and anyone who does not like it can keep their opinions to themselves." "That is my brave girl," Harrison said proudly, and kissed her again. They walked back to Rebecca's home hand in hand, making plans and dreaming about the future. Harrison wanted to save up enough money to buy land of their own, to build Rebecca a proper house with multiple rooms and real glass windows. Rebecca talked about having a garden big enough to grow vegetables to sell, maybe even some chickens. They both wanted children eventually, a whole houseful if they were blessed that way. "I want our children to grow up knowing they are loved," Rebecca said as they stood on her doorstep. "I want them to feel safe and secure in a way I have not felt since my parents died." "They will," Harrison promised. "I swear to you, Rebecca, our children will grow up knowing exactly how much they are loved by both of us." He kissed her goodnight, and Rebecca went inside to her little home that he had rebuilt, and she looked at the ring on her finger, and she felt like she might burst from happiness. The next morning, Harrison went to speak with the minister about arranging a wedding ceremony. Rebecca accompanied him, nervous about how they would be received. Reverend Phillips was a kindly older man who had always been civil to her, even during the worst of the town's hostility, though he had never actively defended her either. "Mr. Kane, Miss Zimmerman," he greeted them as they entered the church. "What can I do for you this fine morning?" "Reverend, I have asked Miss Zimmerman to marry me, and she has done me the great honor of accepting," Harrison said, his hand warm on the small of Rebecca's back. "We would like to arrange a wedding ceremony as soon as possible." The Reverend looked surprised but not displeased. "Well, this is wonderful news. Congratulations to you both." He pulled out a large book and began flipping through it. "I have an opening in about 4 weeks, on the second Saturday in November. Would that suit you?" "Perfect," Harrison said, looking at Rebecca for confirmation. She nodded eagerly. They spent the next half hour discussing the details of the ceremony. It would be simple, they agreed, just the two of them and whatever witnesses were required by law. Rebecca had no family to invite, and Harrison's family was all gone. They did not expect many people to attend anyway, given the town's attitude toward Rebecca. As they were leaving the church, they ran into Sarah Patterson, who had been Rebecca's closest friend before the fire. Sarah stopped in her tracks when she saw them, her face flushing red. "Rebecca," she said uncertainly. "Mr. Kane." "Hello, Sarah," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice neutral. She and Sarah had not spoken in over 2 years. There was an awkward silence, then Sarah seemed to gather her courage. "I heard that you two are courting. My mother has been talking about it constantly." "We are engaged, actually," Harrison said pleasantly. "We are getting married next month." Sarah's eyes widened. "Married? That is wonderful." She paused, then looked directly at Rebecca. "I am happy for you. Truly I am." Rebecca studied her former friend's face, looking for any sign of sarcasm or mockery, but found only what appeared to be genuine pleasure. "Thank you," she said finally. Sarah took a deep breath. "Rebecca, I need to say something, and I should have said it years ago. I am sorry. I am sorry for believing all those awful things people said about you after the fire. I am sorry for turning my back on you when you needed friends most. I was young and scared, and I let my mother's fears become my own, but that is no excuse. You deserved better from me, and I failed you. I have regretted it every day since. Rebecca felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had not realized how much she had needed to hear those words until Sarah spoke them. I was hurt, Rebecca admitted, but I understand why you did what you did. We were both young. That does not make it right, Sarah said firmly. But I hope that maybe, someday, you might be willing to give me another chance at being your friend. I would like to try again if you will let me. Rebecca looked at Harrison, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. Then she looked back at Sarah and nodded. I would like that. The smile that spread across Sarah's face was like the sun coming out. Thank you, and Rebecca, you are going to make a beautiful bride. As they walked away from the church, Rebecca felt like another weight had been lifted from her shoulders. That was unexpected, she said to Harrison. Good things are starting to happen, Harrison said. You are finally getting the life you deserve. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Rebecca had little in the way of possessions, but what she did have she carefully packed up in preparation for moving into the small house Harrison was renting in town. It was not much bigger than her shack, but it was in better condition and closer to his work. They planned to save money for a few years and then buy land to build their own home. Sarah proved true to her word about wanting to rekindle their friendship. She visited Rebecca several times, bringing fabric scraps and ribbons to help make Rebecca's wedding dress. Rebecca was not a skilled seamstress, but Sarah was, and together they created a simple but beautiful dress in cream-colored cotton. It was nothing fancy, but it was new and clean and Rebecca's own, and she loved it. You are going to look so beautiful, Sarah said as they did the final fitting. Mr. Kane is a lucky man. I am the lucky one, Rebecca said. He came into my life when I had given up hope of anything ever getting better. That is what love is supposed to do, Sarah said wisely. It is supposed to make you believe in possibilities again. The night before the wedding, Rebecca stayed up late in her little shack, looking around at the space that had been her home for 3 years. Harrison had transformed it from a broken-down shelter to a solid, comfortable dwelling, just as he had transformed her life from something to be endured to something worth celebrating. She thought about her parents and wished they could be there to see her get married. She thought they would have liked Harrison, would have approved of his steadfast nature and kind heart. She allowed herself to cry for a little while, mourning their absence, but they were not bitter tears. She was grateful for the time she had with them, grateful for the love they had given her that had somehow sustained her through the darkest years of her life. The morning of her wedding dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect Nevada days where the sky was so blue it hurt to look at it. Sarah arrived early to help Rebecca get ready, arranging her hair and helping her into the dress they had made together. You look absolutely beautiful, Sarah said, her eyes glistening with tears. Harrison is not going to know what hit him. They walked to the church together, and Rebecca was surprised to find more people there than she expected. Not a crowd, certainly, but more than just the required witnesses. Mr. Sullivan, Harrison's employer, was there with his wife. The baker, Mrs. Chen, had come. Even Mr. Peterson from the general store was sitting in one of the back pews, and standing at the altar, looking handsome in a new suit with his hair neatly combed, was Harrison. His face lit up when he saw her, and Rebecca felt her heart swell with love. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Rebecca heard herself making vows, promising to love and honor Harrison for the rest of her life, and she meant every word with her entire being. She heard Harrison making the same promises to her, his voice strong and sure, his blue eyes never leaving her face. Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, and Harrison kissed her gently, reverently, as if she were something precious and fragile. "I love you, Mrs. Kane," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too," Rebecca whispered back, and she felt like she might float away from pure happiness. They walked out of the church together as husband and wife, and the small group of people who had come clapped for them. It was not the grand celebration Rebecca had once dreamed of as a girl, but it was real and heartfelt, and it meant more to her than any fancy wedding could have. Mr. Sullivan had arranged for a small reception at the hotel restaurant, and to Rebecca's surprise and gratitude, the proprietor who had once tried to refuse her service welcomed them warmly. There was cake and coffee, and people offered their congratulations and best wishes. Rebecca noticed that not everyone seemed entirely comfortable, that some still looked at her with lingering suspicion, but the effort they were making mattered. "You have changed this town," Sarah said quietly as they watched Harrison talking with Mr. Sullivan. "You and Mr. Kane together. People are starting to see how wrong they were about you." "Harrison changed it," Rebecca corrected. "I just survived." "No," Sarah said firmly. "You survived with grace and dignity, and that mattered. Harrison saw what you were made of, and his faith in you made others start to question their assumptions. But you had to be worthy of that faith, and you were. You are." Rebecca hugged her friend, grateful beyond words for the second chance they had been given. That night, Harrison carried Rebecca over the threshold of their small rented house, both of them laughing. They had decorated it together over the past few weeks, combining his few possessions with her even fewer ones, creating a space that was entirely theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Kane," Harrison said, setting her down gently. "Home," Rebecca repeated, savoring the word. "I have not had a real home in so long." "You have one now," Harrison said, pulling her close. "You will always have a home with me wherever we are." They made love that night for the first time, gentle and passionate and full of wonder. Rebecca had been nervous, not knowing quite what to expect, but Harrison was patient and tender, making sure she felt safe and loved every moment. When it was over and they lay tangled together in the darkness, Rebecca felt complete in a way she never had before. "Are you happy?" Harrison asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I did not know it was possible to be this happy," Rebecca admitted. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this all to be a dream." "It is not a dream," Harrison said, kissing her forehead. "This is real, and it is forever. I am not going anywhere, Rebecca. You are stuck with me now." "Good," Rebecca said, snuggling closer to him. "Because I am not letting you go." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found in each other exactly what they had been missing. The first year of their marriage was not without its challenges. Money was tight, and Harrison worked long hours at the ranch to support them. Rebecca found work doing laundry and mending for some of the townspeople, her skill with a needle finally being recognized now that she had Harrison's reputation to shield her. It was not easy, but they were happy in a way that made the difficulties bearable. Rebecca became pregnant in the spring, and Harrison was overjoyed. He fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more, bringing her anything she craved even if he had to ride miles to get it. Rebecca found his protectiveness endearing, though she insisted she was perfectly capable of maintaining her normal routine. "I am pregnant, not broken," she would tell him when he tried to lift something she was perfectly capable of carrying. "I know," Harrison would reply. "But that is my child you are carrying, and I intend to take very good care of both of you." Their son was born in late December, just before Christmas. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Rebecca was genuinely afraid. but Harrison stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and talking her through it. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Rebecca looked at Harrison and saw tears streaming down his face. "A boy," he said in wonder. "We have a son." They named him Henry after Harrison's father. He was a healthy, robust baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, and Rebecca fell completely in love with him the moment she held him. "He is perfect," she whispered, looking down at the tiny face of her son. "Like his mother," Harrison said, sitting on the edge of the bed and putting his arm around her. They sat like that for a long time, the three of them together, a family. Henry was 6 months old when Harrison came home one evening with news. "Mr. Sullivan is selling a parcel of his land," he said, unable to contain his excitement. 20 acres, good soil, access to water. He is willing to sell it to me at a fair price, and he says I can pay him back over time." Rebecca felt her heart leap. "Can we afford it?" "If we are careful, yes," Harrison said. "I have been saving every extra penny, and with what you have been making from your work, we have enough for the down payment. It will be tight for a while, but Rebecca, we could build our own house. We could have our own land. We could give Henry brothers and sisters and raise them on property that belongs to us. Let us do it," Rebecca said without hesitation. "Let us build our future." They purchased the land the following week, and Harrison began building their house. This time, he had help. Mr. Sullivan sent over some of his ranch hands on their days off. Sarah's husband, who Rebecca had met and liked, came to assist. Even some of the other townspeople offered their labor, wanting to be part of this project. It took months, but slowly a house took shape. It was not large, just 4 rooms, but it was solidly built and it was theirs. Harrison crafted everything with care, putting the same attention to detail into this house as he had into repairing Rebecca's shack all those years ago. He built a sturdy roof that would not leak, real glass windows that let in light, a kitchen with a good stove, and a bedroom for them, and a separate small room for Henry. They moved into the house in the fall, when Henry was a year old and just starting to walk. Rebecca stood in the middle of her new home, looking around at the space Harrison had built for their family, and she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," she said to Harrison, who was holding Henry on his hip. "Thank you for all of this. For the house, for our life, for never giving up on me." "I will never give up on you," Harrison said seriously. "You are my heart, Rebecca. You and Henry, you are everything that matters." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm on their small farm. Harrison continued working at Mr. Sullivan's ranch, and Rebecca tended their garden and took care of Henry. They got chickens, and then a milk cow. They planted an orchard of fruit trees that would not produce for years, but represented their faith in the future. Rebecca became pregnant again when Henry was 2, and this time the pregnancy was easier. She gave birth to a daughter they named Rose in the spring. Rose had Harrison's blue eyes but a softer temperament than her boisterous brother. She was a quiet, thoughtful baby who loved to be held and sung to. "Now we have one of each," Harrison said contentedly as they sat on their porch one evening, watching Henry play in the yard while Rose slept in Rebecca's arms. "Our family is complete." "Maybe not quite complete," Rebecca said with a smile. "I would not mind a few more if we are blessed that way." "As many as you want," Harrison said, leaning over to kiss her. "I love being a father. I love our life together." "So do I," Rebecca said. "I never imagined I could be this happy. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life." Over the years, their family did grow. After Rose came another son, James, and then another daughter, Elizabeth. Their house seemed constantly full of noise and laughter, and the controlled chaos that came with having 4 young children. Rebecca had thought she would never fully regain the town's acceptance, but she had underestimated the power of time and persistence. As people saw her raising her family with love and dedication, as they watched Harrison's unwavering devotion to her, as they came to know her children and found them to be polite and well-behaved, attitudes continued to shift. It was not a sudden change but a gradual one, like ice melting in the spring sun. Sarah remained her closest friend, and their children played together often. Other women in town began to include Rebecca in their quilting circles and church socials. Men would stop by to talk with Harrison about farming or horses, and would stay to have coffee with both of them. Slowly, over years, Rebecca became not the town outcast, but simply Mrs. Kane, a respected member of the community. One afternoon, when Rebecca was hanging laundry in the yard and watching her children play, Mrs. Patterson stopped by. The older woman had aged considerably, and she walked with a cane now. "Mrs. Kane," she said formally, "I wonder if I might have a word with you." Rebecca invited her inside and made tea, curious about what had prompted this visit. Mrs. Patterson had been one of her harshest critics in the years after the fire. "I want to apologize to you," Mrs. Patterson said without preamble. "I have owed you this apology for years, and I have been too proud and stubborn to deliver it. But I am getting old, and I have been thinking about the account I will have to give when I meet my Maker, and I do not want this on my conscience any longer." She set down her teacup and looked Rebecca in the eye. "I was cruel to you after your parents died. I said terrible things. I encouraged others to shun you, and I did all of that out of nothing but fear and superstition. You were grieving and alone, and instead of showing you Christian charity, I made your suffering worse. I am deeply ashamed of my behavior, and I am sorry, truly sorry." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected apology. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why were you so convinced I was cursed?" Mrs. Patterson sighed. "My own mother was ostracized by her town when she was young. They said she was a witch because she knew about herbs and healing. She suffered terribly from it, and I grew up hearing those stories. I think, in some twisted way, I was trying to protect my family by making sure we were never on the receiving end of that kind of treatment. And the best way to ensure that was to be the one doing the accusing rather than the one being accused. It was cowardly and wrong, and I have no excuse." "I appreciate you telling me this," Rebecca said. "And I forgive you, Mrs. Patterson. I have learned that holding on to anger and bitterness only hurts the person carrying it. I would rather let it go and move forward. You are a better woman than I am," Mrs. Patterson said with tears in her eyes. "Your husband saw that from the beginning. The rest of us took far too long to recognize what was right in front of us." After Mrs. Patterson left, Rebecca sat on her porch and thought about how far she had come. From the broken-down shack and the complete isolation to this comfortable home and the acceptance of the community. None of it would have been possible without Harrison. That evening, after the children were in bed, she told Harrison about Mrs. Patterson's visit. "I am glad she apologized," Harrison said, pulling Rebecca close. "You deserve to hear that you were wronged." "I have been thinking about the day you knocked on my door," Rebecca said. "Do you remember?" "I remember everything about that day," Harrison said. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even though you looked exhausted and weary. I remember the way you held yourself, like you were ready to face whatever the world threw at you. I remember deciding right then that I wanted to know you better." "I thought you were going to leave as soon as you found out about me," Rebecca admitted. "I thought you would listen to the gossip and realize association with me was not worth the trouble." "I almost did not go to your place at all," Harrison confessed. "When Mr. Peterson told me about you, my first instinct was to mind my own business. But something made me go anyway. Call it fate or divine intervention or just dumb luck, but something told me I needed to meet you. And the moment I saw you, I knew you were going to change my life." "You changed mine," Rebecca said. "You gave me back my life. You made me believe I deserved to be happy." "You always deserved to be happy," Harrison said firmly. "I just helped you see it." They sat together in the comfortable silence of people who knew each other completely, watching the stars come out over their land, their home, their life. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The children grew, and the farm prospered. Harrison proved to be as skilled at farming as he was at ranching, and their land became productive and profitable. They never became wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Henry grew into a tall, strong young man who loved working the land with his father. Rose became a teacher, fulfilling the dream Rebecca had once had for herself. James decided he wanted to be a carpenter like his grandfather had been, and Harrison taught him everything he knew about building and creating. Elizabeth, the youngest, had a gift for dealing with animals and helped expand their farm to include horses. Rebecca and Harrison watched their children grow and thrive with pride and gratitude. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Rebecca by taking her back to the site of her old shack. The building had long since been torn down, but the cottonwood tree still stood. "I wanted to bring you here," Harrison said as they stood in the shade of the tree, "to remind you of how far we have come." Rebecca looked around at the spot where she had once lived in poverty and isolation, and then looked at the strong, handsome man beside her, her husband of 20 years, the father of her children, the love of her life. "I would not change a thing," she said. "Every hardship I endured led me to you, and that makes it all worthwhile." "I love you," Harrison said, the same words he had spoken to her hundreds of times over the years, and yet they still made her heart race. "I love you too," Rebecca replied. "Thank you for rebuilding my shack. Thank you for rebuilding my life. Thank you for letting me," Harrison said, and kissed her beneath the cottonwood tree, just as the sun began to set over the Nevada desert. As they grew older, Rebecca and Harrison found even more joy in watching their children build their own lives. Henry married a sweet young woman named Martha and took over the running of the farm as Harrison gradually stepped back. Rose married a fellow teacher, and they moved to Carson City, where there were better opportunities. James opened his own carpentry business in Ruby City and quickly gained a reputation for quality work, just as his grandfather had before him. Elizabeth married a rancher and moved to a property nearby, close enough for frequent visits. The grandchildren came, a steady stream of babies and toddlers that kept Rebecca and Harrison busy and delighted. They loved having the little ones visit, loved watching them play in the same yard where their own children had played. Harrison built toys for them, little wooden horses and dolls, and Rebecca sewed clothes and told them stories. "We have been very blessed," Rebecca said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set. They were in their 60s now, their hair gray and their movements slower, but their love for each other had only deepened with time. "We have," Harrison agreed, reaching over to take her hand. "Sometimes I think about how different my life would have been if I had ridden past Ruby City that day. If I had decided to look for work somewhere else." "Do not think about that," Rebecca said, squeezing his hand. "You did not ride past. You came here. You found me." "I found everything," Harrison said. "I was looking for a place to settle, but I found so much more than that. I found you, and a family, and a reason for everything." They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. The desert night was cool and peaceful, and Rebecca felt completely content. Her life had not turned out the way she expected, but it had turned out better than she ever could have dreamed. When Rebecca was 68 and Harrison was 71, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, and it seemed like half the town turned out to celebrate with them. Rebecca looked around at all the people there, people who had once shunned her and now called her friend, and she marveled at the strange turns life could take. Sarah, her oldest friend, now a grandmother herself, came to sit with her during the party. "Do you remember when I helped you make your wedding dress?" she asked. "I remember everything about that time," Rebecca said. "I was so happy and so scared at the same time. I could not believe Harrison really wanted to marry me, that someone actually chose me. He knew what the rest of us took too long to see," Sarah said. "That you were special, that you were worth knowing and loving." "We all make mistakes," Rebecca said. "What matters is that we learn from them and try to do better." "You are very forgiving," Sarah observed. "I am very happy," Rebecca corrected. "And happiness makes it easy to forgive." Harrison came over to join them, moving a bit stiffly with his aging joints but still strong and solid. He sat down beside Rebecca and put his arm around her, and she leaned into him the way she had done for 50 years. "Thank you for saying yes," Harrison said softly, so only she could hear. "Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter cowboy who showed up at your door." "Thank you for knocking," Rebecca replied. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away." "I will always see you," Harrison promised. "You are the first thing I see when I wake up and the last thing I see before I sleep. You are everything." They kissed, not caring that they were in the middle of a crowded room, not caring about anything except the love they shared. As the party wound down and their children and grandchildren said their goodbyes, promising to visit soon, Rebecca and Harrison were left alone in the house Harrison had built all those years ago. The house had been expanded and improved over the decades, but it was still fundamentally the same structure, still filled with the love and care Harrison had put into every board and nail. 50 years, Rebecca said wonderingly. Half a century together. "The best 50 years of my life," Harrison said. "The only years that really mattered." "Mine too," Rebecca agreed. She looked at this man who had chosen her when no one else would, who had rebuilt her home and her heart, who had given her a family and a life beyond her wildest dreams. "I hope we have 50 more." "That might be ambitious," Harrison said with a laugh. "But I will take whatever time we have left and treasure every moment of it." They went to bed that night the way they had every night for 50 years, wrapped in each other's arms, safe and warm and deeply loved. The remaining years passed gently. Harrison's health began to fail slowly, his strong body finally succumbing to age and hard work. Rebecca cared for him with the same devotion he had shown her throughout their marriage. Even as he grew weaker, he remained cheerful and grateful, never complaining about his limitations. "I have had a good life," he told her when he was 75 and knew he did not have much time left. "I have no regrets, Rebecca. None at all." "Neither do I," Rebecca said, sitting beside his bed and holding his hand. "You gave me everything, Harrison. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living." "You gave me just as much," Harrison said. "You gave me purpose. You taught me what it meant to stand up for what is right, to not let the opinions of others dictate how you live. You taught me about courage and resilience. You made me a better man." "We made each other better," Rebecca said through her tears. "That is what love does." Harrison died peacefully in his sleep a few weeks later, surrounded by his family. Rebecca held his hand as he took his last breath, and though she grieved deeply, she was grateful that he had not suffered, that he had been able to say goodbye to all his children and grandchildren, that their last words to each other had been words of love. The funeral was one of the largest Ruby City had ever seen. It seemed like everyone in town came to pay their respects to the man who had become a pillar of the community. They spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his unwavering sense of right and wrong. But mostly they spoke of his devotion to Rebecca, how he had stood by her when no one else would, how his faith in her had helped change an entire town's perspective. He was a good man, person after person said to Rebecca as they offered their condolences. He was the best man, Rebecca replied each time, and I was blessed to be his wife. After the funeral, after everyone had left and Rebecca was alone in the house that suddenly felt too large and too empty, she allowed herself to truly grieve. She cried for the loss of her partner, her love, her other half. She cried for all the years they would not have together, all the grandchildren's milestones Harrison would miss, all the quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset that they would never share again. But even in her grief, she was grateful. Grateful for the 53 years they had together. Grateful for the children and grandchildren they had created. Grateful for every moment, every conversation, every kiss, every shared glance across a crowded room. Rebecca lived another 7 years after Harrison's death. She remained in the house he had built, tended by her children and visited constantly by her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She spent her days working in the garden, reading and recording her memories in a journal so that future generations would know the story of how their family began. She wrote about the fire and the years of isolation. She wrote about the day Harrison knocked on her door and changed everything. She wrote about the rebuilding of the shack, the courtship, the wedding, the children, the grandchildren, the beautiful ordinary life they had built together. She wanted her descendants to know that even when things seemed darkest, hope could arrive unexpectedly. That love could heal old wounds. That one person choosing to do the right thing could change everything. On a warm spring morning, when the desert was carpeted with wildflowers and the sky was impossibly blue, Rebecca passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 79. Her children found her in the bed she had shared with Harrison for so many years, a slight smile on her face, the journal she had been writing and resting on the nightstand beside her. They buried her next to Harrison in the cemetery overlooking the valley, under a cottonwood tree that reminded everyone of the tree that had once shaded her old shack. The entire town came to the funeral, and many people spoke of what Rebecca had meant to them, how she had shown them the importance of compassion and forgiveness, how her life had been a testament to the power of perseverance. Henry, their oldest son, now a man of 55 with grandchildren of his own, gave the final eulogy. "My mother once told me that my father saved her life," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But she did not mean it literally. She meant that he gave her back her belief in humanity, her faith in the future, her sense that she deserved to be loved. And in return, she gave him the family and home he had been searching for his entire life. Together they built something beautiful out of pain and rejection. They taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. They showed us that standing up for what is right, even when it is unpopular, is always worth it. And they proved that no matter how dark things seem, there is always hope for a better tomorrow." As they lowered Rebecca's coffin into the ground, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the cemetery in golden light. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood together, several generations united by the love of two people who had found each other against all odds. In the years that followed, the story of Harrison and Rebecca became something of a legend in Ruby City. Parents told it to their children as an example of true love and moral courage. The house Harrison built remained in the family, passed down through the generations, each new occupant aware of the history held within its walls. The journal Rebecca had written was carefully preserved and eventually published as a small book that circulated through the region. People read it and marveled at the transformation of a woman who had been the town outcast into someone beloved by all. They read about Harrison's quiet heroism, his refusal to let prejudice and fear dictate his actions. They read about the gradual change in the town's attitude, proof that people could overcome their worst instincts when given the right example. Decades later, when Ruby City celebrated its centennial, the mayor gave a speech acknowledging the town's past mistakes and highlighting the story of Harrison and Rebecca Kane as an example of the community at its best. A plaque was placed on the site where Rebecca's shack had once stood, commemorating the place where their story began. The plaque read, "On this site stood a broken-down shack where Rebecca Zimmerman lived as a town outcast after the tragic death of her parents." In 1876, a cowboy named Harrison Kane rebuilt this shack and asked to court her, beginning a love story that would transform both their lives and change this community for the better. Their courage in the face of prejudice and their unwavering love for each other remind us to always choose compassion over fear and love over hate. Visitors to Ruby City would sometimes make a pilgrimage to the site, standing under the old cottonwood tree and imagining the young woman who had once stood there, broken and alone, and the cowboy who had seen past the town's prejudices to the person underneath. They would visit the cemetery and stand before the shared headstone that reads simply, "Harrison Kane, 1851–1926, and Rebecca Kane, 1854–1933. Beloved, together forever." And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever place souls go when they leave this world, Harrison and Rebecca were together again, finally reunited after their years of separation, sitting on a porch watching a sunset, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest, both of them at peace and deeply content. Their legacy lived on in their descendants, who inherited not just their features but their values. The importance of standing up for what is right, the power of love to overcome any obstacle, the courage to defy convention when convention is wrong. The belief that every person deserves dignity and respect, regardless of what others might say about them. Their great-great-granddaughter, a woman named Rose after Harrison's beloved daughter, became a civil rights lawyer who spent her career fighting for the marginalized and oppressed. She kept a copy of Rebecca's journal on her desk, and when cases seemed hopeless and the opposition too strong, she would read about her great-great-grandmother surviving years of isolation and her great-great-grandfather standing firm against an entire town's prejudice. Their example gave her strength. Their great-great-grandson, named Henry after Harrison's father, became a builder like his ancestor. He specialized in creating affordable housing for families in need, making sure that no one had to live in a broken-down shack the way Rebecca once had. He named his company Kane Construction, and beneath the company name on all his business cards was a quote from his great-great-grandfather. "A man needs purpose. Building something that makes life better for someone else is purpose enough." The farm that Harrison and Rebecca had built remained productive and profitable through the generations, though it had been expanded and modernized over the years. The current owners, direct descendants of Henry Kane, ran it as a family operation and made sure that every child in the family learned the story of how it all began. They learned about the town outcast and the cowboy who loved her. They learned about the rebuilding of a shack and a life. They learned about the importance of seeing people for who they truly are, not who others say they are. Every year on the anniversary of Harrison and Rebecca's wedding, the family gathered at the cemetery to lay flowers on their graves. The youngest members of the family would ask to hear the story again, even though they had heard it dozens of times before. And the older members would tell it, keeping the memory alive, making sure that the lessons learned by Harrison and Rebecca would never be forgotten. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the struggles or the hardships or the pain, but the love that overcame it all. Not the broken-down shack, but the home that was built from its ruins. Not the outcast and the stranger, but the family they created together. Their story was proof that one act of kindness, one decision to do the right thing regardless of the consequences, one person choosing to see the good in another when everyone else sees only the bad, can change the course of many lives. It was proof that love, real love, the kind that chooses to stay when leaving would be easier, the kind that builds when it would be simpler to walk away, the kind that sees possibilities when others see only problems, that kind of love can literally transform the world. And so the story lived on, passed from generation to generation, a reminder that even in the darkest times, even when you are most alone, even when the whole world seems to have turned against you, love can find you. Hope can knock on your door. And someone can see you, truly see you, for who you are and choose to stay. Rebecca had been the town outcast, living in a broken-down shack, forgotten and abandoned by everyone. Harrison had been a drifter with no home and no purpose, searching for something he could not name. Together they had found what they both needed, a reason to believe in tomorrow, a partnership built on mutual respect and deep affection, and a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Their ending was not just happy. It was complete. It was the fulfillment of everything they had both dreamed of and more than either of them had dared to hope for. It was children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It was a house filled with love and laughter. It was 53 years of marriage and a lifetime of memories. It was acceptance by a community that had once rejected them. It was purpose and meaning and joy. It was everything. And in the end, when their story was told and retold through the years, when their descendants looked back at the legacy they had left, the lesson was simple and profound. Love wins. Not easily, not without effort, not without struggle and sacrifice. But in the end, when all is said and done, love wins. Harrison had rebuilt a shack and asked to court the woman who lived there. And in doing so, he had rebuilt her life, her hope, her future. And she, in accepting his courtship and giving him her heart, had rebuilt his purpose, his dreams, his world. Together they had built something that lasted far beyond their lifetimes. They had built a family, a legacy, and a love story for the ages. They had proved that kindness matters, that courage counts, that standing up for what is right even when it is difficult is always worthwhile. And they had lived happily ever after.